Hello.
Hey, Eric, how's it going?
Good. How are you?
Good, good. It's probably a good time for India, right?
Sorry?
Is this a good time for India?
What do you mean by good
Oh,
time?
no,
It's like
it's not 9
9:30.
p.m.
Yeah, that's fine. But it's all like settled in, chill kind of thing. Like dinner is done. Hello.
Hello.
Hi,
Hey.
Poonam.
Oh, I think mine is the only one on the agenda.
Let's give folks a few more minutes. Is this your first time on this call, Poonam?
I have joined a few before. I'm trying to be more regular. It's just hard, you know.
Welcome. I mean, welcome again, I guess.
Thank you. And I have conflict with the last 30 minutes. I'm trying to move that meeting so I can join this call more regularly.
Sounds good.
Yeah, I'm a product manager for Policy Controller, which is a managed gatekeeper offering from Google. So I work.
I remember you were on the call. Yeah, I remember that a few weeks ago.
Yeah, so definitely, you know, we want to start contributing some of the things that we're building from policy controller point of view back into open source. We're having some internal discussions, and when we have a proposal, you know, then we will discuss it with this group.
Yeah, definitely. That'll be most welcome. I'm guessing you work mostly with Max's team.
Max, you know Max, right?
Mm-hmm.
Max, yeah, he and we are on the same team.
Oh, Max, Smike.
Smike, yeah.
Yeah,
Smike.
yeah. Okay, yeah. You guys are on the same team.
Yes.
I see. Okay.
Well, he focuses more on the open source side. And I'm the product manager, so I focus more on the paid product. But there's always an intersection. And Sartak, you are from?
Me and Nick are in Microsoft.
Microsoft. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I've seen your commits on the policy library recently in the Gatekeeper project. I was looking at it. Yeah,
I also knew Sartash in the same way. Sorry. So before joining Microsoft, I was seeing Sartash's commit on the Gatekeeper because I was using Gatekeeper at my previous job. So I also know him like that.
Yeah. Well, we are all definitely want to make Gatekeeper successful. You know, it's foundational, and we have vested interest in Gatekeeper success. So I'm so glad to see both of you. Don't know if anybody else is joining. Do we want to kick this thing off? Go through the topic that you've listed?
I just pinged Rita
Yeah.
just in case if she's joining. Yeah, but we can get started.
I can ping
Cool.
Max also. Making sure I spell your name right. Think of it like a LDAP format to fix. I started adding the attendees. Let's see if everybody likes it.
Cool.
Pinging Max.
Usually, the early mornings are take some extra time.
Yeah, the afternoon meetings are easier, I guess. By the way, I'm curious, before we get, like, why do we have this different schedule for Gatekeeper calls, like morning and the evening?
Yeah, we set up for the European time zone folks. At the time, we had a few folks that we wanted to make sure that they can join the call.
Okay.
So to be more like time zone friendly with different places.
Makes sense. Okay.
And if they cannot make one of them, they basically skip a week and then they can join the other one.
Makes sense. Okay. If we are okay, I can get started.
Yeah, let's get started.
Cool. So probably just to give the context to Poonam, right? What we are trying to do is, so two things actually we are trying to address here. So we want to list the gatekeeper policies on the artifact hub. And the second thing that we are trying to do is we also want to have some kind of CLI down the line where we can either like fetch policies, install policies, search policy, or discover policies for that matter. So those two things are we wanted to do, and they are sort of overlapping because of the versioning. So both of them wants versioning basically. So artifact hub, when we are trying to list the policies over there, uh, it needs to have a version. And of course, the primary motive of ours with the CLI is that people can have a version policy, so they know like basically what changes between the policies and the standard sameware convention that everybody understands. So that's the idea. So we touched based on versioning part a little bit in the last meeting, and Max sort of gave like one of his thought around it, and I basically try to put together the same thing in this proposal. So what I've sort of listed is, so one really good point Sartaj brought up last time was, since most of these policies are already out, it is safe to assume for us that we will be, I mean, these policies are being used by user in production. And by that assumption, we can say that all the policies will be 1.0.0 to begin with. That's how we will probably start versioning them. And then I have tried to capture what the major version upgrade should look like, minor version, and the patch version. So yeah, I would love everybody's feedback on that. And I might be missing some part because I've been a little out of the touch from the gatekeeper. But yeah, please feel free to provide your feedback on that, or whether whatever I have captured is the correct, or does it make sense, or it's correct or not. And we can refine this doc based on that. So for major and minor, I have sort of come up with some criteria, but for patch, I could not really think of any. So it would be great to probably hear your thoughts on that. So go ahead, sorry.
Sorry, Neil, I was trying to find the hand raise feature, but it's a little hard in Zoom. So I'm gonna, yeah, I have a few questions on that, and I will review your doc and add comments to that as well. But just from a scope point of view, I think you are only talking about the versioning of constraint templates. You're not including
Yes.
any constraints in that image, right?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, that makes sense. Another follow-up question that I have is, Microsoft, if you go to the policies, I've seen on the Azure cloud that you have something called as initiatives, which is a group of policies. Have you looked at it? Or,
I haven't, but
okay. So it's basically a group of policies that you can just apply. For example, in Gatekeeper, we have PSP as one of the folder if you go under the library, and we have
yep,
all the PSP policies listed there.
right.
So let's say I'm a Gatekeeper user and I want to take all of the PSP constraints in addition to the templates that you already have. And I want to say that, hey, whether I'm PSP compliant or not out of the box. So I don't have to write those PSP YAMLs or, do a piecemeal, pick and choose things.
Yeah,
So
probably the pod security standards is a good fit for the buckets. So like I only want to deploy the restricted bucket or baseline, that sort of stuff.
Correct, absolutely. So no, I took the example of PSP because we already have PSP, right? And I was thinking that as we are thinking about this versioning of the library, we should also think about, can we package our constraints and also version them? So, our customers can just, after installing the library, they can install a set of constraints, which is managed by the open source community as well. Just a thought, and I'm happy to add the comments to the doc and also write it up if that helps. But I think we should think about that as well.
Right. Cool. The question probably I have for maybe all of you is like how often do we see these kind of things? I'm not actually sort of have the full context. Like how often users are using this thing as a bundle? Do we know? Like, do we have any insight on that?
Yeah, I mean, I can give you some data. I work with a lot of customers, and we've also done a bunch of research in this field. And we found that one of the friction points for customers to adopt Gatekeeper is they do not want to, or they do not understand the Rego, and they do not know how to get started with the constraints. We found that as a big friction point with our enterprise customers. And then, one of the takeaways that came from that research is one of the banks actually told us that, hey, my security requirements are very similar to any other bank. And there are some standard set of things like PSP, PSS, which should just work for me without doing a whole lot of work. So, that is the thought process. And then, you already have initiatives in Azure. I think Styra has something called as policy packs. They call it policy packs. And we are introducing a concept of policy bundles, which is just a group of constraints. So people can just, as soon as they install Gatekeeper, those constraints, they run in a dry run mode, but they start getting some signals into whether they are compliant with that particular set of constraints or not.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, so from a versioning point of view, and I'm going to add it to your doc, so I'm sorry I did not review it before joining the meeting. We should also think about, if we all agree that that is a reasonable thing to do, then we think about how to version that along with the library.
Yeah, I was just thinking about this last part. So like, and just this is me thinking out loud. But like, let's say if we have to also think about this group versioning, then what does it look like, or how does it look like? Like, do we also version each policy individually, or some group policies will always be deployed? I mean, I think just sort of from the logics perspective, I think versioning each individual policy with its own version makes sense. But if that's the case, then what should we do for the group versioning? So yeah, I mean, I don't know. Like I'm also still trying to think.
Yeah, and I'm not saying we version each individual policy. What I'm saying is, hey, we have a group of constraint templates, and then let's have a group of constraints, which is available to
Sure.
gatekeeper users. And the group of constraints could be PSP or PSS baseline or PSS restricted, something like that. And then during install, we can just say when they are installing the library, I also want to use PSS baseline, for example, for my cluster. So in that sense, you have now a set of templates and you have a set of constraints which refer to this template is what I'm saying. And we don't have to solve it on this call, but something to think about
Sure.
if we think it's a reasonable idea.
Yeah. I don't know if I want it on the exact same doc as this necessarily, because I think it's a different scope. I would like to make sure that what we're doing with this doc is compatible with this idea, right? And have that idea out there, if that makes sense.
Okay. Sure.
Yeah, totally. Yes.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so yeah, please feel free to sort of put, review the talk and put the comments, and I'll keep on sort of revising it. The second thing, hang on, I think, okay, never mind. So second thing, actually, I wanted to sort of touch base is hosting this policies on the Artifact Hub. So actually, so I've opened an issue with those folks, and they have sort of created a staging repo where they have sort of listed like couple policies as to sort of give us an idea like how that would look like. So it's really simple. Like what we've been talking or we were discussing in the previous call is, hey, do we have to do or come up with a new directory structure or not? And it looks like we don't have to. So what they have done is they have assumed our directory structure, and they are rendering the policies or rendering the content rather based on that. The only thing that we need to do is add the metadata file that the Artifact Hubs needs in probably each policy directory, and that metadata file will have bunch of metadata information, essentially like versioning, name, full-blown README file, or the install instructions and whatnot. But what I have seen, if you look at that staging repo, right? They could render the install instructions, they could render the examples, and the examples are essentially nothing but a constraint and then allowed and disallowed examples. So those things they have sort of done by assuming our directory structure. And since we have this directory structure already in place, I think it will go really nice with the Artifact Hub as well.
So when you're saying assuming our directory structure, couple of things, right? What are we also assuming like the example prefixes, all that, like hyper reliance on file naming being semantic?
I can validate this from their PR, but I don't think it's the naming convention, but rather the directory structure. So for example, they need, if you, I'm not sure if you have that link, but let me quickly find that link and maybe share here. Or I don't know. Sartaj, do you have one? The link for the staging repo.
Oh, I think it's in the
oh yeah, it's in the doc. Sorry.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. So what I'm so if you look at that link, right? On the right hand side, you have something called as templates or something like that. So what they have done is basically they have assumed that everything in the samples folder can go over there basically. So that's what I meant when I said they have assumed our directory structure. And the same thing goes with the the README file. So right now, the way they have the README file is they just sort of pass the description from the template.
Where is
Sorry.
this link? Where is this link?
I just
I
pasted
think-
in the chat, but it's also on the Nilex policy versioning and artifact tab listing doc.
Okay, so I'm not quite, I clicked on one of these, but I'm not, okay. So you're saying there's examples here? I don't see.
Oh, on the
Samples.
right side, there's samples under install. There's install, samples, and changelog.
Oh gosh. Okay. So I don't know if the samples are helpful as written, to be honest, right? Because there's the constraint, right? But we could have multiple different constraints for different shapes of policies, right? Different example disallows, right? Like the sweet YAML shows that. And different examples are going to correlate with different constraints, right? And different examples may need different referential data. So it's nice that these are here, but I don't know if it has the semantic information for users to really grok what correlates with what. Does that make sense?
How does it then different from what we have on our policy website right now? I mean, on there also we are listing it in the same fashion.
Yeah, let me look at the policy websites. So I can't say off the top of my head while I'm looking what we're doing on the policy website, but I can say that yeah, how do we get to the policy website here? I can say that we should be at least correlating blocks of examples, right? So for this constraint, here's an example allowed, example disallowed. For this other constraint, here's an example allowed, example disallowed. For an example of this could be required users, right? That PSP. If you're just requiring not root, you're going to have a different set of examples than if you're requiring a specific user, potentially. Thank you for the link. Now, the other challenge is, can we find a sufficiently complex example? Let's try the allowed users just for. Okay, so it looks like in examples, I haven't found a complex one, but just looking at the allowed users one, it's a series of dropdowns, right? Users and groups together. Then it's showing you a particular constraint, example disallowed and allowed. All right, what would be maybe in general?
Oh, I see. Hang on. Container ratios might be the one that you're looking, probably.
Container ratios. Yes, thank you. Yeah, so that's an example of the correlation.
Right. And I think, yeah, so that's I think, so then, okay, on the policy website, we are doing it probably the right way. So that's actually really good feedback. So let me talk with those guys and figure it out how we can sort of have the same thing over there as well. Because, and actually we can, what I can do is actually I can go ahead and add this sample policy on that staging repo and see how that might look like.
I think on the artifact hub site, the name is going to be different, because I see on this one, the allowed repos, it says the name repo must be open policy agent, right? So that's the name of the constraint example. So for the container ratios example, the name will be memory ratio only, and then the / constraint or example, whatever, and then the other one is memory and CPU ratios.
Sorry, I didn't get you, Sartash. What do you mean?
So I was saying that in the artifact hub, I think the way they're describing will be fine, even with two different like constraints, because the name of the constraint will be, or the thing will be different.
Right.
So in this case,
Sure.
this repo must be open policy agent, right? So in this case, it could be something else. So there's going to be another constraint there.
Correct.
So,
but I think what Max is also trying to say is, if we can have a similar grouping over there, so that users would know, like, this constraint.
I see.
and
So
this
like more
example
like
are
a like it's attached to this
correlation.
thing. I see. Yeah.
Correct.
Makes sense.
Correct.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I think that's definitely better visualization.
Correct.
yeah.
Sorry,
and
Max,
that,
were you saying the same thing?
oh yeah, no, that's, and just relying on file name could get kind of iffy, particularly if we're reusing the same, say, referential data for multiple constraints.
Yeah, I see what you mean now. Yeah, I mean it's definitely understandable, but the example in the actual library website is more clear with that.
Yeah, and mostly my pushback there is I want to get us off of tight reliance on file names, right, and directory structure, because that's brittle. I mean, the other thing I was thinking about was, you mentioned in your doc the versions, right? The fact that it will only show the latest version unless we store the other versions of a template beside it, right?
It's one of the option, and I think that's other thing I actually want feedback on, or rather we should decide what we want to do. So two things we can do, as I said there, right? Like, we can, for each version, we can have an individual directory, and within that individual directory, we can have all the artifacts related to it. Or the other thing is, we are just saying that, hey, here is the latest version, and we don't have any sort of context of the previous versions on the artifact hub. So that's the two options. So the con for the first approach is, like, we are sort of duplicating everything, but then at the same time, it's sort of easier way to store the version, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, so what is it like for users if a particular version disappears, right? Are people who consume things from Artifact Hub doing it on a regular basis and pinning the version?
Yeah, that's actually a good point.
Um,
So I mean, so from the consumption perspective, though, like, it's mostly just like literally copy pasting those YAML files and putting into their clusters, right? So when let's say version disappears or the newer ones becomes available, probably they will just do copy paste and do kubectl apply, so the newer version gets applied. That could be that might be the user experience.
I would hope. I don't know the consumption model for Artifact Hub, right? If it's the same as kubectl apply raw GitHub user content.
It is, and it's literally what we are going to say in the what we are going to say in the install instruction. So Artifact Hub doesn't have the consumption model or anything per se. What it has is mostly just ability to discover stuff, and you can specify how these artifacts are going to be consumed or installed.
Yeah. So yeah, if it's not disturbing users, that versions can disappear from underneath them, right? if they don't have any kind of like automated consumption model that would be brittle against disappearing versions, maybe it's less of a concern. I don't know the consumption model of Artifact Hub, but that's the primary warning bell I have, right? Like, if we took away a gatekeeper manifest version, we almost certainly would break some users, right? Or a gatekeeper Helm chart version.
Right. Yeah, but again, like one thing I think we should know here is like Artifact Hub is not is not is not the source of truth here for artifacts or version. It's still our GitHub repo. So whatever we have in our GitHub repo, it's just rendering that. So if we want to have a multiple version or like all the versions rather of our policies or all the changes, we should have it in that in our GitHub repo. That means the one option is, as I said, like having the directory for the individual versions and then putting the changes in there. So that way it will also get reflected in the Artifact Hub, and you can see like probably nice history of all those policies. And
yeah,
I think it's
okay.
Sorry, like one more thought, but it also I think be interesting or important from the CLI perspective, because like whatever the preliminary discussion I had, like what I understood is like we would also want to probably sort of discover the different versions through CLI, right? And then pull down a specific version. So I think we need to have some kind of a mechanism to store the version or all the version of a given policy. And I also thought about this. And so, I mean, one immediate thought is like, can we tag them? But then doing tagging for individual policy on GitHub or Git might be a bit difficult, or it might get convoluted real quick. So directory is a way to go, or it might be like the simplest approach. But my only thought on that is it may be sort of duplication, but I would love to hear what you all think on that. Like, is it okay? Or
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of the same, not quite the same experience as our website docs, because I think there with the website docs is an expectation of going back and updating older iterations if relevant. I don't think that's the case here. So definitely precedent. I do wonder what the end state of this repo looks like. Like, how many versions would we have sitting next to each other? I don't know if I would, for the like touch point, to the extent that users are exploring our repo by like examining the directories or whatever. I don't know if I would have all the versions there, right, in that like core source of truth. So maybe the thing would be to have a separate like
directory structure.
Repository directory, something. Go ahead.
Oh no, I was just trying to complete your sentence. Sorry.
Oh no, but well, I was curious. What idea you put in the sentence.
Right. Actually, what I'm trying to think is like, so let's say if we want to do like a separate directory structure just to store the versioning, what will go to in the primary directory structure, or so-called like the source directory structure, right? Will it always have the latest version or content of the latest version of that policy, or like?
I would assume, yeah.
Okay. I mean, that's what I was also thinking. Interesting.
There's also coupling concerns. I don't know how salient they are. Maybe you have context you could give us around if we do dual duty with a directory structure, using it for both Artifact Hub and other things. What's the risk that Artifact Hub will make a choice, right, that disagrees with a choice that we've made? And is there anything we could do to get out of that situation, right? Like move the source of truth Artifact Hub is pointing at, or something like that.
So actually, it's opposite. For Artifact Hub, it doesn't have any opinion, right? It has it forms the rendering, or it renders the stuff based on what users are trying to define, or what that kind is trying to define. And since we are creating the kind here, we are the one that will be setting the structure.
I see.
So yeah, so it's literally us telling them like what it is, and what you should look at to render those things.
Okay. So as long as we have control over the kinds, we don't have to worry about.
Well, but we have to define it. Like, we create kind once, right? And when we create that kind, we define that structure. So everybody else who wants to put the policy under that kind, they would have to follow the same directory structure that that kind is expecting.
Right, but we're not vulnerable to other people making decisions about that kinds. That then, because it could work the other way, right? If the contents of how the kind parses the directory structure, if that logic changes, right, and it's changing in a way that doesn't work for other things that we're trying to do or are doing, right?
Yeah, I mean, there is a risk of breaking rendering if we change the directory structure. That's for sure.
Right. And I'm not thinking about like us intentionally breaking things. What I'm thinking about is they technically own this parser, right? And they decide to make some change, right, that seems innocuous, mostly is innocuous, but we've used the same directory structure both as the source of truth for Artifact Hub and, say, the source of truth for discovery for the CLI. And it turns out that our discovery thing makes an assumption that is fundamentally incompatible, right, with whatever the assumption is that Artifact Hub is now making, right? Is there a way out of that situation, right? Like either changing the source of truth or for Artifact Hub.
The only thing that I can think right now is we have to just work with them. Like, I mean, they've been super helpful till now. So we can work with them and fix it if this comes. But then the other implication of this thing is this will break for like all the users, or many users rather. So they would also be really careful when they make changes on this. So, and I think what they have done is probably the way they have it is like they have like this well-known parser or tracker, they call it. Let's say for Helm, they know how this thing is going to work. And what they have done is for all the other stuff, they have this thing called as generic tracker. And within the generic tracker, when they define a kind, they say that, hey, this is going to be the directory structure for this tracker, and we are going to just render using it. So I would assume that they will be very careful when they make a changes. And if something breaks, I mean, we just have to work with them to get it fixed, I guess.
I would like to know there's a backup plan if, even with good wills, right? Sometimes things just, if it's incompatible, right?
Sure.
Those things aren't always.
I can check with them actually what does the support looks like from their end. So for example, like let's say when we create this new kind, then what will be the scenarios or cases where it will break, for example? I mean, we can have those discussions with them.
So I don't I don't. So the surface area is infinite, right? I don't think we can prepare for all possible scenarios, right? My question is more, what's the break glass? Like, is it possible to ship these sources of truth, right? Because there's two options here, right? Well, three options, right? We could sort of go into this blindly, right? And hope things work out, which probably fine, but in the case where it's not, there's a certain cost there, right? There's an option where we preemptively set out a separate source of truth that's only for Artifact Hub, right? And then the concern is kind of moot, because if they change their expectations, we, whatever, that's their source of truth, right? We can adapt, or we validate that, in the case where there's some sort of fundamental incompatibility,
Sure.
for instance, pointing at a different place, pointing Artifact Hub at a different place is a way around it.
Right. So here is the thought, and that is also actually one of your review comments on the website doc, which is like earlier when we were doing the website doc, I just inferred it from the directory structure. But then I think the absolute good way of doing that is in like reading it from the suits.yaml, because that's like the source of truth for everything. And that was actually a really good way of doing it, rather than inferring it from the directory structure. What I'm thinking is we can do similar thing for these things. So for Artifact Hub, we can have like a certain directory structure, probably what you have suggested, like just a separate directory structure with all the like co-versions and all, and then Artifact Hub can render it from there. But for the CLI, we do not have to necessarily rely on that directory structure. We could have like another source of truth like suits.yaml for the versioning. Maybe we can just maintain a file or something like that where we know what policy or what all different version of the policies there are, and then try to probably read it from there. This is just a thought. I don't have like any thought out process or anything for this, but I'm just thinking out loud here.
Yeah, I mean, so you're saying let Artifact Hub take the directory structure as syntactically significant. We can have some other thing, is I think what I heard over the meowing.
Yeah.
That makes sense. I mean, it strikes a little bit of danger warning signs in me whenever you're giving a significant amount of control over like the directory structure to people who are not necessarily always going to have the same interests as you, right? That's why I want to make sure we have a story for that, because it would be a shame otherwise if we.
No, for sure. But I'll argue the same thing again. Like we are the one who is setting the directory structure, and we are telling Artifact Hub that you should read it in this particular manner. So in a way, we are in the control. But I also see your point. Like what if it breaks, or what if for some reason it breaks? Sorry, Rita.
Yeah, no worries. Interrupt real quick. Like I think you had mentioned if we do start introducing a a new folder structure, it might break existing users, right? Didn't you say that earlier? Is there a way we could like introduce a folder structure for these, like for the website as well as Artifact Hub, without actually having to create directories in the GitHub repo? Like say if we have a metadata in the YAML or something, such that you don't, I mean, I don't know what the contract is for existing users. It's always been a struggle. But
Yeah.
say we don't want to break people, then you could maybe have like certain metadata added so that you don't break existing people, but then the website and Artifact Hub can use that field maybe.
Right.
Can we add
So-
symlinks? So we can still have the version folders, but then the latest will point to whatever we have today. So
That's a good
that
idea.
won't
Correct.
break anything.
Yeah, and I think that's what Max was sort of referring to earlier, and I think it's not. I mean, we actually didn't think that we are going to break the existing user, but that certainly takes care of it. Like we will have, or like we can have the separate directory structure where each policy with its own version directory will be there, and the metadata I was referring to is something for our other use, for example, like CLI or something like that, so that CLI don't have to rely on rely on the directory structure, and it has like its own source of truth, and it can discover whenever we try to get or list the policies. That way, one of the Max's concern is like if the directory structure sort of change or break for the artifact hub, our CLI won't break, I guess, something like that. But then again, like at this point in time, like it's I mean, this thought looks good. I don't know the implementation detail for CLI yet, like how that source of truth and CLI implementation would look like. I do have like a good picture of Artifact Hub and how the directory would work, but that can be an option.
Yeah, I mean, and if you just take the most pessimistic approach, and I'm not saying that we necessarily take that approach in reality, but if you just assume that these two things drift and you can't use the same source of truth.
I mean, I think there are a few options, right? For CLI, we can bake it in, right? Because CLI will have a version of it, so we could just bake the files in, so there is no like gatekeeper library thing. Or we could do like OCI artifact sort of thing, and we can like push images so then the CLI can consume from like specific images. Again, this is just like thinking out loud. So we could basically put it in a location that's just like, hey, this is there forever, and it won't change with the library structure.
That is interesting. And now
I think we also want to like the version of CLI for sure. So I think it makes sense to sort of like, hey, in version 1.0, you get these versions of the templates. Version 1.1, you get these versions of them.
Yeah,
so, I mean,
that's actually.
Wait, right. You want to tie the CLI to the policies? I think it needs to be separate, right? I mean, I assume we want to reuse Gator for this. I assume.
I was going to ask.
And that should be decoupled.
So I think what Sartash is trying to say here is more like a kind version, like with a specific kind version, you get specific Kubernetes version. So that's something like that, like with specific, let's say, Gator CLI. You will get all these policies. If you want newer policies, get the new CLI or upgrade your CLI.
Yeah, I know, I understand. I was just saying, like
do we want
extendability wise, it's better to decouple them. Kind of like Helm CLI versus like Helm repos. Like you don't want to tie it with older CLIs.
I mean, I guess that's a good point. Do we want the CLI to be? We are kind of going off topic here, but we want CLI to be work with different libraries, or just the Gatekeeper library?
What do you mean?
Yeah. So do we want like a Helm repo sort of approach, or do
let's not grow the scope more than
Well, I would assume the CLI would have some sort of like discovery thing, right? I don't know like what breadcrumbs it would look like look for.
Are we like trying to build Helm? It feels a little bit like like the Helm versioning aspect of the Helm CLI and like the versioning of the different Helm charts. In the equivalent of Helm charts in this case are the policies.
Yeah, it's very similar.
It sounds more and more like it.
Yeah.
I could see
Okay.
myself writing another proposal for CLI.
I actually don't know much about like Helm's like interdependency discovery stack, so maybe I get the sense there may be a different kind of granularity. I certainly wouldn't use Helm on cluster to manage the policies because that's a lot of metadata it's storing on cluster.
Yeah. I only mentioned that because it just like feature wise it sounds similar. But also like I linked to the Kyvernal I mean, because we were talking about the bundle idea earlier, right? The bucket idea earlier. They kind of did that with a Helm chart specifically for all the PSA policies. So people have done this with Helm, and not to say that's what we want to do, but that's I think I can see why they did that, because again, it's reusing something that already exists that people are familiar with. And because you're bundling it, right?
Yeah, I think we could do the same thing with the templates,
totally
but we just wouldn't have the constraints for it.
I mean,
yeah. Oh, sorry, go on.
Sorry. Yes, you wouldn't have the constraints. Yes.
Right.
I think if I want to try to like break this Helm model and using the constraints bundling thing as an example, the first place I would start to poke at it would be if you had multiple constraints relying on the same constraint template, and you had some sort of like versioning requirements logic, right? Like must be at least this version, must be at most this major version, or something like that. Is that something that Helm would be able to resolve across multiple consumers?
Yes.
Okay.
Like you could tell Helm to say like, oh, for this you need like the template to be of this, at least this version plus. You could do that. I think the cat.
Yeah. Got, and it would be able to, if you had multiple things depending on it, it would be able to resolve that if you had multiple constraints.
Multiple constraints. Are you saying the constraints are?
Well, so let's say you have your PSS bundle, right? And then you have your I always forget the name of this, but the Kubernetes security, that compliance regime that Kubernetes has, right? You have a bundle for that, right? And they have certain constraints that touch on overlapping templates, right? But they're written by different people, right? So they're not going to coordinate on which version they're using, right? So you wind up with this dependency resolution issue. Maybe an example of this would be in Helm, if you had two projects that relied on cert manager.
Yeah, you could create like a dependency on a different chart.
Right.
On a different chart.
Was it?
A chart that depends on a different chart.
Right, but if you had two separate charts that depend on a different chart, is that a situation that they?
Yeah, you could have multiple charts that depend on like the same dependency, I guess.
Yeah, it's just pointing to a reference for the dependency. So like, doesn't matter if it's being pointed to something else.
Well, but so there's version conflicts, right? Like you get this in code, right? Like, oh, I want the YAML v1 parser. Oh, I want the YAML v1.1 parser. And in fact, I break if you don't use v1, and I break if you don't use v1.1, right? That old annoyance.
This will really go in that CLI proposal.
No,
This
I'm
discussion.
just trying to.
Sorry.
Oh, sorry. I'm just trying to figure out like the soft spots of where, you know, would Helm fit, right? Or would it not, right? Where does the, and if it doesn't, where does the breakdown happen? Because that's instructive, right? Either we don't need to be building a thing and we should just use something else, or
Yeah.
if we know where it breaks down, we know what we need to really highlight in terms of what we're building.
I think Kube Warden is doing the OCI one.
Yeah.
If we,
They did.
yeah,
Yeah.
correct. Right. So I mean, either of Kyber nor Kube Warden, but yeah, I mean that could be another option, but let's see. Actually, I like Sartas's idea, to be honest, like breaking everything into CLI binary. That is the most simplistic and non-convoluted approach, in my opinion. Like you get a binary, you get a number of versions. I mean, you get a set of policy versions, and we cut a binary in the regular interval, and you will get a regular interval. There is a tight coupling, but it is simplistic, in my opinion.
So where that breaks down, if you have every single version of every constraint template baked into the binary, maybe you could do that. Like, because there, when you see a constraint, no matter what its version requirements are, you probably have that template. But then you have binary growth concerns, and you also have discovery and extensibility concerns.
And
Why
mix match? Like, what if you want a later version of one policy but not the other one? It's going to be hard.
I think that those are the scenarios that get complicated, right? If it's dynamic. So say, I don't know, a CLI version that's, I don't know, one thing is compatible with your cluster, but the other one we updated it, that's not no longer compatible.
Yeah, I think the trickiest example we have of that is the oh shoot, what's that thing that moved from the seccomp profile? It moved from annotation to field, I want to say.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, anything dynamic can have that sort of thing, right? Because it can be updated dynamically.
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
I'm just going to say it couldn't break like behavior if it gets updated, like without users knowing about it. Like it was working today for me, right? Tomorrow it no longer works. I mean, assuming you won't be able. Version.
I would argue that's a good thing, because then you can fix things on the server side without the user having to do anything. Imagine you need to push out a patch.
Yeah, I mean, definitely pros and cons in both cases. Yeah. But I mean, if you version it, obviously that's not a problem, though.
Yeah, I would.
Yeah, sorry.
I would let the user decide what they want to do. Like, they should be able to lock versions, or say just give me latest, right? And in some at some points it's going to be the constraint, right? That's going to have an opinion on this, right? I was written as of v1.2 of this template. If you go below 1.2, you're missing a parameter I use, and that's just not going to work.
So I think we're at time, and I know there's still a lot to be decided in terms of versioning, CLIs, and all that. But do you have what you need in terms of versioning at least?
Yes. but okay, two things. So I think what I got from the from artifact hub perspective, what I really got is like we can maintain a separate directory structure for the versioning for each policy, and then we have our regular structure where the latest will always go there. So that's what I think we can do. For the versioning itself, like I think I mentioned in the doc, we can start with 100 to mark is they all are like production ready. The increment part that I have written in the doc, right? I would probably just want feedback on that, like when we will upgrade major, minor, and patch, because those will not affect the implementation of Artifact Hub, but it will go more in like a README doc, so that the user will also have an idea when we are implementing what, and we also have some guideline when we were cutting the new versions. But with this thought, I think we can proceed with the Artifact Hub thing. And I will do check that multiple stuff like with container ratio, what Max said, like that correlation thing for the example. So I'll see how that we can render on the Artifact Hub. And of course, we'll have then version. So
we didn't get to other topics, but that is, I guess, okay. Couple of things. If folks have time, can we look at the things that the stale bot closed? I know there were like a few things that I had to like remove the stale label, and I think there was a PR that got closed. Maybe just take a look.
I've been going through. I think I missed the PR one. What PR got closed?
Let me check. I get pinged on Slack, so we don't have to spend time on this. And then also,
sure.
I see. Is it Punmi?
Poonam?
Poonam, sorry. Is Poonam KubeCon talks on Gatekeeper? What does she mean by this?
So I don't know off the top of my head like what she was intending. I can say she has a lightning talk at one of the pre-conferences. I forget which.
Gotcha.
That uses Gatekeeper. So that's one bit of information. Whether she's looking for other talks, I don't know.
I see. Yeah, I think it would be good to share all the Gatekeeper related things with each other for KubeCon. So if you can share that, like a link to the session, that would be great. So we
I'll add it. What's that?
So we can attend.
Oh yeah, I will not be at KubeCon, by the way.
Gotcha. I see. And then also, I think you saw I asked if we have stuff that we want to announce, right? I think KubeCon asked for like announcements for different projects, and I thought it would be a good idea to make sure that people are aware of all the new features. So that's, I think there's a doc for that somewhere. But yeah, I'm trying to work on that when I have time. Peter started a doc. Other than that, our hackathon next week. So I'm trying to create a Zoom thing so that we can just attend, and please take a look at the doc, I guess, whenever.
Yeah.
All right.
One thing I just wanted to say, like we have search on the Gatekeeper library website.
Nice.
Oh,
Very
shoot.
nice.
Works really well.
How what's the link to the how are we getting to the library again?
I think that I just posted the link.
It's also
on
the link is on the library too, on the repo.
It's on the repo. It's on the Gatekeeper website, and then it's also in this chat.
Okay, so yeah, I looked on the repo, but I was like, I guess reading and paying attention to meeting fail. Cool. So let's see what happens when hub security. Oh, nice. Oh, you can. Okay. So it'll give you like related to. That's pretty sweet. Users. What's it? Allowed users. That's great.
All without doing very minimal work. Like it's a server specific. Or I should not have said that. I said, "Oh, that's the one I did."
You sputtered over it.
But the code can't lie. So
I heard it too late.
code can't lie. So that's right.
Cool. Nice work.
Yeah.
Thanks.
All right.
Cool.
Talk to you guys later. Bye.
Bye bye.
Bye.